before we get started with quotes and how to use quotes, I just want to give us a bit of a refresher and some guidance on punctuation. So let's take a look here. I found a pretty decent web page from University of Lynchburg that gives us some definitions and some examples to use here. So of course, you know, we've talked about periods, exclamation points, and question marks, right? The things that are going to end a sentence, whether it asks a question, whether it's making a statement or giving you a command, it's going to be a period, or an exclamation point, which is expressing, you know, emotion, whether it's, you know, happiness, anger. It's expressing more emotion than what the simple period could show. Punctuation, generally speaking, is you know, signaling the reader to some change within the sentence. Of course, you know, within punctuation, that's signaling that is the end of that sentence. That's the end of that one thought or idea. And then the rest of these are dividing the sentence up and showing change in some form. The first one, like it shows here, the comma, that's going to be the most commonly used punctuation outside of your end punctuation. And the definition I have here, commas are primarily used to aid in clarity and to join two independent clauses with conjunction. They set off introductory phrases.
I'm not concerned or care how long she gone. When I heard, like, as soon as I call her for her, you be like, oh, well, you can bring her. Oh, sorry.
All right. Yeah, so they set off introductory phrases and they set off series. They also are used to separate independent dependent clauses. So the Oxford comma is the inclusion of a comma before a coordinating conjunction in a series. So we'll talk about that in a second. Plain and simple, a more simplified definition for a comma is that it separates your sentence into meaningful units. Right, I love that definition. Some people will say, you know, it introduces a pause. Yeah, that's way too vague. But what it really does is it separates it into meaningful units. And so their first example there, that is separating two independent clauses, right? So I enjoyed the singers, I love the dancers. You have two simple sentences there. When you have similar ideas, right, in a sentence, you can combine them. It has to have a conjunction. Right, it has to have a conjoining word. So I enjoy the singers, comma, and I love the dancers. Right. Other, you know, common conjunctions that you see, like but, yet, things like that. And then the next one, at the beginning of the performance, that's an introductory phrase. Right. The independent clause comes after that. Two dancers appeared from behind the curtain. You have a complete sentence there. The at the beginning of the performance, that's an introductory phrase, right? It's telling you when, you know, this happened, comma, two dancers appeared from behind the curtain. So you separate that with a comma. The next one, you have a dependent clause. So even though the auditorium was packed, the audience remained silent, right? So even though the auditorium was packed, that is a dependent clause, right? It does not stand alone as a sentence. You don't have a subject there. You know, it doesn't make sense alone. The audience remains silent. You have your dependent clause there. You don't use a conjunction when combining a dependent clause with an independent clause, only the comma. And then finally, what it's talking about when you list stuff in a series, right? When you're listing things, I had eggs, comma, toast, comma, and orange juice. And what they're talking about, the Oxford comma, which just in general, I use, historians use it, our manual that we turn to for guidance in these things, always has the Oxford comma, right? So you always put a comma before and whatever that last thing in your series is. You know, there's some other style manuals and things like that that will say you don't have to have it. It's better safe than sorry, because sometimes you can change the meaning. That's the other thing about commas. They will change the meaning of a sentence depending on whether you have it in there or not. But here in the list, I had eggs, comma, toast, comma, and orange juice. Right. Interjection, right? We talked about intervening phrases. It's additional information that splits up a sentence. So, and here, perfect example of how a comma changes the meaning of a sentence. So the criminal said the judge was an idiot. That's saying, right, the criminal said that the judge was an idiot. You pop those commas in there, the criminal, comma, said the judge was an idiot. Now it's the judge calling the criminal the idiot. That's, you did not change one word in that sentence, but the placement of those commas changed the entire meaning. That's how tricky punctuation could be. But yeah, in a lot of times intervening phrases, like we showed yesterday, right? When you're trying to locate a subject, a lot of times a comma will separate information that you will still have a complete sentence on either side of, right? So particularly when you see two commas setting things off, that's going to change, you should be able to eliminate that and still have a sentence. In this case, you would, but it does change a little bit of the direction. So you could still say the criminal was an idiot, but who's saying it, right? Apostrophes. We'll get some work with apostrophes not far down the road. Apostrophes are used to mark possession and contractions, right? So we know, when you're shortening a word, it's, right? This is probably one of the most common ones instead of it is or it has. So you use the apostrophe there. Or possession. So it was James, and that's wrong. The example they have there is wrong. It was James's car that the drunk driver hit. Here's a really good example, and I'm really upset that a university let this slide. Apostrophes when it comes to possession, right? So it doesn't matter if it ends in S. If it's a singular object, if it's a singular subject, if it's a singular noun, James, that's a singular noun, you add the S. It's still apostrophe S. So it should say it was James's, even as awkward as it may sound sometimes, it was James's car that the drunk driver hit. You only put the apostrophe if it is a plural that you're showing possession of. So if I had like a group of softball teams, right? And so it would be TEAMS, right? That's the plural for teams. The softball team's field, right? Showing possession of the field. Then you would only use the apostrophe. So that's bad. That's bad. That is an incorrect example that they're giving there. That should be James's car. And then the second one there, James said, if you come any closer, I'll call the police. I don't know why they have that in there. But yeah, for possessives, you put that at the end with the apostrophe and S if it's singular. It doesn't matter if it ends in S. If it is a plural that ends in S, you just use the apostrophe. We'll get some more work on that later. Quotations. This is why I wanted to bring that. Delasha, did you have a question?
Yeah, like when to use a double quotation and single quotation.
Well, it depends on where you are in the world. We'll talk about that. So yeah, you may have encountered that in writing. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll bring that up here. So quotation marks, right? Like it says, quotation marks are used to inform a reader either of something that was spoken or something that is being directly copied from another work, right? So that's where our lesson in Essential is going to be today. Quotes should also be placed around a word if it is used in a specific context or otherwise bear special attention. In informal applications, quotations can also be used to denote something that is ironic, right? If we go like quote. But what you're going to encounter most, right, is for it to set off a direct quote. So just like this, Lydia said, comma, is this my prom dress? when you use them in this situation, when whoever is speaking, as you introduce them, you put a comma before the quotation. You may start a sentence with a quotation. So you could also say, like for that second example, the use of violence against women in India is on the rise, claims Dr. Shruti. And you would say the use of violence against women in India is on the rise, comma, quotation mark, says Dr. Shruti, or however you want to say it. But you always either end it if your reference to the person is at the end of a sentence, you're going to use a comma, or if it's at the beginning. And in the case if it's at the beginning, it's outside of the quotation. If it's at the end, it'll be the inside of the quotation. So it would replace the period at the end there. And to answer your question, Delasha, those single quotation marks, right? If you only see one on each side, typically that's sort of a style choice, and other countries that primarily speak English, so like Great Britain, right? They use single quotations instead of double quotations. So if you're reading a book that's published in, in the UK, typically they'll have them in single quotations, whether it's double quotations or single quotations. So here, if you're quoting something within a quote, you use single quotations, which is something you don't see very often. And likewise, so these other countries that use the single quotes, if they have something that's quoted within a quote, then they'll use the double quotations, right? That's the only difference. It's just a style thing. I don't know if it's us trying to be different or Britain trying to be different, but yeah, that's the only reason you'd see one over the other. I think, well, I just finished Lord of the Rings not that long ago, and Tolkien uses, like the single.
And also, like, I find like weird is like in my back country, we don't use a comma before and, but here they do, like.
Oh, okay. To separate like two independent clauses. Yeah. Now there are some occasions where you'll use and without separating. If you're listing things, and it's only two, right? In situations like that. But yeah. Sometimes and sometimes there are some style choices. But this is safe ground here, right? If you stick with this kind of stuff, you're going to be in good shape. We already talked about questions and exclamation points, so we're going to skip that. A hyphen. Hyphens are most commonly used to pair compound words, right? So when you're kind of creating your own word or like a mini phrase, you throw a hyphen in. So throw away, right? That's not one word together, but it kind of it can be used that way. High-speed chase, right? That's a little shaky. I think you could just you could eliminate the hyphen there and it'd still be okay. Merry-go-round, right? So words like that, user-friendly. They're probably more common in modern English, like in the 21st century, because we tend to combine words like that, making new words all the time because of technology and things. But yeah, it's basically pairing two words that are not already compound words together. A dash. So you're not going to run into those a whole lot. You wouldn't use them a whole lot. You're going to see them more in fiction writing than you would in nonfiction writing. And like it says here, or, sort of like writing for entertainment. And there's two kinds. So an N dash and an M dash. And the differences are very subtle. So an N dash essentially looks like a hyphen, but it has a little bit of a different purpose. M dash are longer. And the way you recognize them is, right, an M dash, just like it's stating there, is the length of an M, and N dash is the length of an N, like a lowercase n. And it's sort of used to make abrupt, sudden changes. So like it says, dashes are able to substitute for commas and semicolons in the right situation. they can replace commas to note non-essential information or semicolon to note an example. And that's why you see them more sort of in fiction writing, because it's sort of a more of abrupt aside, like it's more of a abrupt intervention in the sentence than what the comma is. The comma is kind of softer in that regard. So if it's a sudden like switch in thinking, particularly like if it's dialogue and your character is talking, they might abruptly use the em dash to show that sudden kind of switch. Right, and if you were to use it, like if you were to, go into your word processor like Word and type it, basically you would start your word, and then you hit your hyphen button twice, and then you keep typing, and it'll actually connect those two automatically into an em dash. Parentheses, brackets, and braces. So good knowledge here. So parentheses note non-essential information that could be skipped without altering the meaning of a sentence. Brackets are most commonly employed in academic writing within a quotation where the writer is omitting or explaining something. In either case, the writer places a bracket within the quote, explains or places an ellipsis, and closes the bracket to continue the quote. The thing about whether it's parentheses, brackets, or braces, they're sort of like, you kind of think of them like the author is talking directly to you, right? Just like it says, it's non-essential information. It's additional information that the author is supplying. Like they said about brackets, you will see them used in historical writing sometimes. So let's say the author is quoting some old, tore up document, and it's not in very good condition, and there's words that's missing, like maybe they've been kind of smeared, or it's damaged or whatever, and the author will put brackets around words implying that that's what should be there, right? So it's sort of best guess, and that's letting you know that document might not have been the best condition and that word's missing. So, like their example here with the parentheses, Cora, the woman who lives down the street from Jane, works as a paralegal. So obviously we have a complete sentence without those parentheses. And then Professor Brown claims she, the novel's central character, is an example of a strong African-American woman, pretty much using the parentheses or the brackets in the same way there. I wish they had an example there where you could see, those brackets being used. And then before I go on vacation, I need to pack my bags, clothes, toiletries, and shoes, unplug the TV, and close all the windows. So they're using them in very similar ways here. Another thing that you may encounter, and you may have seen, along the way here, is the word sick, S-I-C, in brackets next to something in a sentence or a quotation usually. That is to identify, and I'm pretty sure sick like that is Latin for something, but it's an indication by the writer that something is spelled incorrectly or the grammar is incorrect. So again, like if you're quoting a document, and it's maybe somebody's not a good writer, maybe they're poor English, or like, for example, particularly like in the 19th century, your former slaves, as they're learning to read and write, or for that matter, most people before the 20th century, because literacy rates were fairly low, and you were lucky to learn to read and write. Honestly, I couldn't even tell you what most people's grade level of education would be. So you would run into those occasions where people are writing letters and things, just like we saw that the letter from the slave and everything. So if you were to quote that within your writing, to make sure that the reader understands that this is exactly what was said, and not like a typographical error or an error by the writer, you put sick next to it, and that explains that, okay, this they understand that this is the way it appeared in the writing. Ellipsis marks the omission of a word or words. If the omission includes the end of a sentence, you use 4 dots, so you have a period at the end there. So yeah, like it's sort of like saying yada 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 in a sentence, right? You're just kind of omitting stuff that's maybe not as relevant. It's also used sometimes to sort of imply that things are happening. Or move things along. So you're going to encounter this pretty rarely, not something that you would use very often. I think we use it probably more in like texting and things now than we do, that we're going to encounter them like in formal writing. A colon, really important too. So colons make the statement, note what follows. Okay, so whatever information that follows, the colon must in some way explain, prove, or describe whatever came before it. So a lot of times it sets off information. It'll set off a list of items. And as I said, so to properly employ a colon, ensure that the clause that follows the mark is able to stand on its own, unless it is a list, because whatever comes before the colon must be a complete sentence. So as it says here, the bridge keeper asked me 3 questions, right? So we have a complete sentence there, but then we add the colon to denote what's coming next is a list. What is your name? What is your quest? What is your favorite color, right? So typically that's going to set that off. Semicolon, though, a little bit different. Yeah, Nilda, we're going to do essential here in a minute. RLA reading. I was just giving a little primer on punctuation. In about 2 minutes here, we're going to move over to essential. Semicolon can be used to join 2 related main clauses. Here's my rule of thumb for semicolon. Use them sparingly for starters. Secondly, they basically can replace the comma and, right? So if you can say that in a sentence, you could use a semicolon. So James left a mess at his desk after he left work. Sarah had to clean it up. But you could just as easily say James left a mess at his desk after he left work and Sarah had to clean it up. Again, you'll see those probably more in sort of like fiction writing and things, particularly like if, in dialogue, right? People will a lot of times will omit their ands and things like that. But that's a way to, that's basically the only other way you can join 2 independent clauses and make it a sentence without a conjunction, right? What else we have here? Oh yeah, the other way that you're going to use a semicolon is to join 2 related main clauses to include a conjunctive adverb, like however, moreover, nevertheless, furthermore, consequently. If you're just using but, right, you just use the comma because but is a conjunction. But these are going to show contrast, right? So nevertheless, furthermore, and everything. If they are at the intersection of 2 independent clauses. So James left a mess at his desk after he left work. Consequently, Sarah had to clean it up. Semicolon on the first side, comma on the second side, okay? Only in between 2 independent clauses. All right, so that's a little primer here. We'll deal with that a little bit more as we move down the road. So we'll go ahead and jump over to the lesson on using quotes now. RLL reading. Okay. Here we go.
Hey, dude, this is the lesson about quoting from a text. This lesson will teach you to quote accurately from a text when explaining what the text says and when drawing inferences from the text. So you know how teachers tell you to make sure to use a lot of evidence from the text. Well, back in high school, I used to go a little overboard with that. Whenever I'd use quotes, I'd use like half a page of block quotes per page. I figured, hey, writing a 5-page paper is a whole lot easier when half of it is written for you, right? Don't do that, dude. My teachers weren't too happy with me back then. I remember in 9th grade, I turned in a paper on Of Mice and Men, and my teacher Ms. Salazar, joked that she was going to give the credit to John Steinbeck. After all, there were so many quotes in my paper that most of it was written by Steinbeck anyway. Yeah, that's not the right way to use quotations. Mr. W set me straight. He taught me how to use shorter, more specific quotes that support what I'm trying to say. I've even used the skill in real life, dude. Like a few months ago, my brother Jesse got in trouble with our apartment complex. They tried to say that he was parked in guest parking when he wasn't supposed to be. Well, I decided to read our tenant's handbook. Turns out, Jesse was perfectly okay to park there when he did. So I sent an email to the property manager, and I used lots of quotes from the tenant's handbook. Here's one. Isn't that a beautiful quote? They can't very well argue with their own tenant handbook, right? Anyway, they cleared up the matter pretty quick. My brother was happy too. I mean, once I explained to him what I was doing, emailing the property manager without telling him. Anyway, dude, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. Let's do this.
All right. Yeah. So as he's talking about here, use your quotes sparingly, make sure that they're the most relevant. And there's basically a strategy to do that. When it comes, particularly with your extended response, you are supposed to be showing that you can think critically about what you've read, right? And it's hard to do that if everything is just quotes.
Okay, let's talk about how to quote correctly and accurately. First, you gotta find something you want to quote. That has a lot to do with your purpose. Like, what do you want the quote to do? Maybe you want to use the quote as an example of an idea. Or maybe you want the quote to support something you're trying to say. Always keep your purpose in the back of your mind. So let's say I'm writing a paper about stress. I want to convince the reader that stress can be a good thing. So I'm doing some research, reading articles about stress. In one article, I find a quote that I want to use. The quote says, "Your body creates hormones that help you cope with danger or difficult tasks." Sweet. This quote is perfect, dude. It talks about the benefits of stress. So I'm going to use this quote. Now I have a choice to make. I can go with a direct quote or an indirect quote. I think I'll go with a direct quote. A direct quote is when you report exactly what somebody said, word for word. When I write a direct quote, I start with an introductory phrase that tells the reader where the quote is from. So I might go with something like, according to science writer Teresa Fernandez. See? There's the introductory phrase. Then the quote in quotation marks. If the original text is capitalized, it should be capitalized in your quote too. This kind of introductory phrase works best if the reader already knows the author. If I haven't mentioned Ms. Fernandez or her newspaper yet, I can use a longer introductory phrase. Maybe something like this. Now the reader knows what newspaper Ms. Fernandez writes for. But let's say...
Here's another thing about using those. This adds credibility to who you're quoting, right? So like he says here, the first time that you introduce somebody in your writing, if you can, say something briefly about their profession, according to Brian Shane, professor of history at Ohio University, right? Something like that. And then he'll show you, how to carry on.
This is like the third time I've quoted Ms. Fernandez. The reader would probably get annoyed if I kept saying, according to science writer Teresa Fernandez.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't worry, dude. Once I tell my reader who Ms. Fernandez is, I don't need to repeat myself. I can shorten my introductory phrase to something like, Fernandez states. And if you don't know the author's name, you can just go with the author says. The more your reader knows about who you're quoting, the shorter your introductory phrase can be. Now,
and also, just style-wise, if you are quoting several times, after your first one, and you're saying like Fernandez says, You could even after that say try to switch the phrase up a little bit. Say things like Fernandez asserts or Fernandez states, and try to avoid repetition in your quotes.
When I'm using a direct quote, I have to make sure that the quote is identical to the text I'm quoting. That's not true of an indirect quote, though. An indirect quote is a paraphrase. An indirect quote reports what someone said, but using your own words. So here's that quote from earlier. Let's say I want to quote this text indirectly. I might say something like, according to the author, the body creates helpful stress hormones in time of need. That says pretty much the same thing, but in my own words. Notice that I still used an introductory phrase. Indirect quotes use those too, and they work in pretty much the same way. Notice how there's no quotation marks around an indirect quote. You don't need quotation marks where you're saying something in your own words. Indirect quotes are great when you want to paraphrase many sentences into one quote. Well, that's the basics of how to quote correctly and accurately. Do you want to give it a try?
Yeah, so that's just things you got to watch out there for. If you're quoting, that's where I was talking about where the sick brackets come in, right? Because that way you're making sure that people understand that you're using a direct quote there, even though it might not be correct grammar or spellings and things like that. And then you have to use the exact language in a quote, whether it's punctuation, whether it's capitalization, anything like that. But in your writing, particularly for your test, limit those as much as you can. Paraphrase much more. You're going to use paraphrasing a lot more than you will quotes. And also when paraphrasing, you can kind of summarize a little bit, and putting it in your own words, reduce how much text you're writing, and leaving more room for your own words. You'll probably have a question here.
The following is a correct and accurate direct quote of sentence 7.
Okay, so sentence 7. Let's take a look here. Yeah, so right here, the stress doesn't just make you feel unhappy. And we have that semicolon we just talked about, right? It can make you sick. So let's see here. Nilda, I'm going to pick on you. Which one here represents that?
One second.
Take your time.
A?
It's B, right? So Fernandez says stress, and as far as it's really nitpicky, but like she actually uses a contraction. So we're going to make sure that we say stress doesn't just make you feel unhappy, it can make you sick. And that's one of the main differences there, right? It wouldn't matter, you could say the author states when you're introducing it, but what we're really looking for here is the fact that she uses a contraction. We want to make sure our text, our language matches up perfectly, and it's a quote. So it should be.
What's the difference between
Great job.
B and C then?
You remembered that a direct quote must use the same wording, capitalization, and.
So you're saying, hold on, back there.
B, you said B, and then also I find it similar to C too.
Which of the following is a correct and
what
accurate
about the
direct?
C? I mean,
What's the difference in C?
C and B, yeah.
Yeah, so C, one difference. That capital letter. That's the only difference. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about, right? It's got to be, letter for letter, word for word. And in the passage, right, it's the beginning of a sentence. So it's capitalized. Yeah, that's how tricky it can be, though.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, here we go. Oh, let's get Dude back on. Well,
it's like a guess about what's going on. You know what? Here's what Mr. W calls a real-world example. Take a look at the last 3 texts I got from my brother Jesse. First, Jesse texts me, "Dwayne, you forgot to take out the trash." Then he says, "Dude, it was your turn to do the dishes." About an hour later, Jesse says, "I told you I was having guests over this afternoon." So, dude, I think I have enough support here to make an inference. I think I'm going to infer that my brother is mad at me. That's what I think is going on. An inference is based on support. There's plenty of support here for me to infer that my brother is not happy with me. I was supposed to take out the trash when I left for class. I didn't do it. It was my turn to do the dishes. I didn't do that either. So yeah, Jesse probably had to rush through my chores before his company came over. Of course he's mad at me. That was not my best effort, dude. Still, you see what I mean, right? All these quotes from Jesse support the inference that my brother is mad at me. If you're thinking about using a quote for support, ask yourself, how does this quote support my inference? If you can see how the quote logically supports your inference, then that's a good quote. If you can't see that supportive logic, ask yourself, why not? Is the quote off topic? What made you consider that quote? What made you think twice? The more you think about how a quote does or does not support an inference, the better you'll get at finding support for inferences. So what do you say, dude? Ready to identify quotes that support an inference?
Yeah, so that's why you're going to use quotes, right? You're looking for the evidence that's going to support the claims you're making. So that's you making inferences and drawing conclusions. So you want the stuff that's most relevant to those. So you're looking for that information. So we'll have a little short passage here. I'll read.
Which quote supports this inference?
Right. So what we're looking for, right, are out of these quotes, we're looking to support the idea that emergency rooms use many electronic devices to help their patients. That's for some context here. Have you ever had to go to the emergency room? It can be confusing and tiring. My sister was having pains in her chest and abdomen. I took her to the emergency room. There were so many doctors and medical workers that they were hard to keep track of. A medical technician gave my sister an EKG to check her heart and a chest x-ray. Doctors in the trauma care area checked her x-rays, and another technician gave her an ultrasound. Did you know there's a special career for taking blood? It's called a phlebotomist. And one took my sister's blood. A nurse looked after my sister, and an emergency room doctor looked at her test results. When they found something on the ultrasound, a gastroenterologist had to look at it too. Gastroenterologist is a doctor that deals with the digestive system. My sister was sick and tired. She couldn't even remember all the doctors, nurses, aides, and technicians. Still, she was happy that they took care of her. They helped her get well. It made me think about how many healthcare jobs there are. There are many types of doctors. They deal with every part of the body. There are also many types of nurses, aides, and technicians that run tests and help patients. Medicine is a complex field. Each person has a special role. Each worker knows one small part of the field well. They all work together to solve difficult health problems. All right, so emergency rooms use many electronic devices to help their patients, right? That's what we've inferred by part of that passage. So what quote out of those 4 supports that inference? Let's see, Levon, how about we go to you? You want to try that?
Yes, sir. I'm going to answer it through the text.
Okay, go ahead. what we got here? B. So it's going to be D. It's that last one there. So thinking about, right, she's talking about electronic devices. So medical technician, right, gave my sister an EKG to check her heart and a chest x-ray. So yeah, that directly, as far as inferences, right, directly speaks to the inference we're making. We're finding evidence to support that inference there. So the types of equipment that they're going to use.
Great job. Exactly. The story mentions both an EKG and an X-ray machine. Those are both electronic devices that doctors use to monitor a patient's health. Sentence 7 mentions an ultrasound machine too. There's all kinds of support here.
Yep. Okay, and we should be over to our questions.
Cool. Nice job working on those exercises.
Yeah.
Are you ready to do some track?
Sure we are. Yeah, so let's take about, you know what, I'm just going to go through it as well. So however long it takes me, we'll start at 10 minutes and see if we get through there. I'll give you guys some more time if necessary. All right, so go ahead and work on that. I'll stop sharing my screen. I will pause the video. All right, so I noticed with that exercise having to do a lot of back and forth, like I'm looking at, the question and I'm having to look at the boxes and I'm having to go back to the text to look at it and make sure. And they're throwing some curves at us there because of the sort of like inferences that they're making, paraphrasing that you're having to look at. So it was actually, compared to, like our little two, warm-up questions there, a little more involved than what you would expect. Really making it, really kind of a detail-oriented exercise today. But yeah, that's a good primer as far as understanding, how to paraphrase versus how to directly quote things. And the takeaway, of course, is if you're directly quoting, it has to appear just like it does in the passage. But you should do those as sparingly as possible. When it comes to things like what you might see in your extended response are things like statistics. And, it's easier when you get to like some technical jargon or things like that, it's easier to use direct quotes and then instead of trying to reword things. But when it's less sort of specific information, you could do your best to try to paraphrase. So any questions on using quotes, making inferences from quotes and pulling that information together? Everybody good? Okay. So we will wrap up then, heading into the weekend here. So yeah, guys, I'm so glad that you're showing up and attendance has been pretty strong these last few days. I know things happen. If you got to miss a class, always remember that everything's on Google Classroom by the end of the day. Nilda, you want to go over them? Yeah, we could do that real quick. So just let me share that. If you missed any, we can kind of follow up here. So let me get back to that. Hopefully I answered them right. Where it is. And the right lesson plan here. Yeah. Quoting from text. There it is. Okay.
Hey, dude.
All right.
This is the lesson about
past that. Right. So this first one, what you're looking for, right, is he's saying is a correct and accurate quote of the sentence. So it's not a direct quote, right? It is it's just making sure that it contains all the information. Yeah, there is Spanish as well. So you could do these lessons in Spanish. Just remember, you're gonna have to take it in English when you get to the test. So the author says the PG rating means some things may not be okay for children under 13. The author says that a PG rating indicates that the movie might contain things unsuitable for kids. So if we look at the passage, right, so the next rating is PG or parental guidance suggested. Some things in the film may not be okay for young children. We do not have a direct quote in any of those. This is not an accurate quote that a PG rating indicates that the movie might contain things unsuitable for kids. Right, that does not come directly from the passage, nor does the second one. A PG rating indicates that a movie might contain things unsuitable for kids. Also, not the same language. So it's a paraphrase. And looking at the two options that we have there, this one here is the best one. Okay. Right, and then what quote supports this inference? So the inference made from the passage, right? This is somebody thinking, reading between the lines, that the purpose of movie ratings is to help parents find suitable movies for children, right? There's the idea presented there. So what out of those gives us that information?
That one is C.
C, the author notes that movie ratings give parents an idea about what's in the movie. Yeah, there you go. That encompasses, it's not so broad that it doesn't, really reference the inference, and it's not so narrow that it doesn't, eliminate anything that's in the inference there. So which of the following is correct and accurate quote of sentences 4 through 5? So we're going to pop in 4 through 5. Movies don't need to be rated. Still, some theaters won't show unrated movies. So none of the actual quotes are correct, right? That language is not correct in either one. So we have to hop down to the paraphrased ones. The author notes that theaters will not show unrated films, even though the law says it's okay. Well, it says, they can, some theaters don't. So that's going to be,
I think it's C.
Yeah, it's C again, right? The author notes that though ratings are not required, some theaters won't show unrated films. And that's a good paraphrase of that information.
Good job.
Keep going here. 5 left. Which of the following is a correct and accurate quote from the text? So the author says, all of your containers must fit in one quart-sized resealable bag. Make sure you know the weight requirements of your airline. Keep the liquids in the outside of your carry-on so you can easily take it out and put it back at security, or you'll need room in the overhead compartments for your bag. This is what I was talking about, right? Lots of back and forth trying to determine what the exact language is. So I don't think it was any of the direct quotes, right? It is the paraphrase. Correct? Try to save a little time so I'm not like having to go all the way back through those.
A.
Is it A?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's A.
Let me see. All. Yes, all liquid. No, wait. All of your containers must fit in one quart-sized resealable bag. All of your containers must fit in one quart-sized resealable bag. So word for word, letter for letter. There we go. You should keep all right. So another inference, right? You should keep all of your liquids together. We've read this passage already once. Your liquids together in a single bag, ready to be inspected. So we are paraphrasing that information, right? Keep the liquids in the outside of your carry-on so you can easily take it out and put it back at security. Or the author says that all liquids must fit in a single bag and should be easy to take out at security. So
A.
I believe it is A. Right. As it says, each quote needs an introductory word or phrase in order to be correct and accurate. So that's the other thing, whether it's a direct quote or you're paraphrasing, if you're referencing something from the text, you need to make sure that you mention that. The author says this, or they state, they suggest this. And which is the following is not a correct and accurate quote from the text. Let's see. think. See, this is incorrect, isn't it? With just a carry-on bag, you won't have to wait to check your luggage. Because he says here, when you get off the plane or on the plane. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, the author says that the TSA only allows a small amount of liquids and gels in carry-ons. Author says the TSA only allows a small amount of liquids and gels in carry-ons. Okay, so that's a direct quote. TSA. Or is it? D. Let's see here. I feel like it's C, but let me see here. Nope. Yeah, because they use the whole name of the TSA. A direct quote inside quotation marks must be an exact word for word. So there, it's actually, I don't want to hit review.
Okay.
Yeah, so that direct quote, they should have had the name, the Transportation Safety Administration or whatever it is. Just saying the TSA is not an actual, wasn't in the text there. Oh, having a good memory would help with schoolwork, which quote does not support this inference. I want to mention too, as far as a test taking skill, make sure you read the questions carefully. So, understand, it's asking us what it not support this inference. You have to be careful sometimes because they'll throw you things like that. Okay, having a good memory would help with schoolwork. The author suggests that memory helps with math since you need to know timetables. Memory. We have an answer there?
I don't.
I think it's D, right?
That is what I think, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, because by way of example, the author reminds the reader, in medicine, you study bones in the body. That does not have anything to do with schoolwork and memory.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Oh, that was wrong. This quote is,
Suggest memory.
the author suggests memory aids have been around for hundreds of years. And I'm working through those because I didn't read this passage. So don't be surprised if I miss one. Okay, so last one here. Which of the following is a correct and accurate quote from the text? The author says that although memorizing facts and details can be hard.
Drink water and go sit down.
What was that?
I think she was talking to her kids.
Oh, okay, okay. Let's see here. Memory helps you access information. Subjects of thought and history is key. Details often though memorizing is difficult at first. Memory aids can help. Memory aids have been around for hundreds of years. Ancient Greeks and Romans remember by location. A story about poet Simonides. Instead, it's clouds. Next.
I think the number 10, the A. I think it's A. The other notes, ancient Greeks and Romans memorized by location.
Let me see.
A.
Hey, let's see. There we go. Yeah. So the author says that although memorizing facts and details can be hard at first, memory aids can help. Direct quote. Oh, so they're looking for direct quote. That's not accurate here. So, okay.
Hey, dude. Thanks for taking my lesson on quoting from a text.
All right. Yeah.
Remember,
summary here. Yeah, so hopefully that'll help. I'll start reviewing more as we go along. And Nilda will remind us that she's not our dude. We'll just have to keep putting up with him though, I guess. Yeah, so well, I'll start trying to plan to kind of review questions and make sure you guys are on the right track in the future. Again, I want you guys to go through them at least once on your own, because that gives us an idea as far as tracking, your progress. With Paxson, it's Nilda will remember, we worked through a lot of questions together, which was great. You guys always got the right answers, but it doesn't really help Rachel and I as far as charting progress and things. So any questions though as far as quoting? I think we got a pretty good primer on that, and as we get into writing and extended response, you'll see why that is such an important lesson. And then of course the social studies, looking at credibility. So again, kind of interlinked and related lessons there. Any questions? Now's your time. Okay. All right. So we'll call it a week then. So another week in the books. And I will see you guys on Monday, 12:15. Y'all have a beautiful weekend. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.